Bismillah Rahman Rahim. First of all, let me thank the NBFI and Modaraba Association for providing me this opportunity to share my thoughts about this very important report. And I want to congratulate the authors and the people who have worked very hard to produce this very fine report. I think the quality is something which I think you should all be very proud of. And I hope that this will be a series of the reports of this nature for the future also. I don't want to repeat what I have said in my foreword, and I think Farooq has pointed out some of those points, so that is a repetition. I would like to take a much broader picture to place the NBFIs and Modarabas and the Sharia compliance instruments. You may all know that Pakistan's savings and investment ratios are about 15 to 14% of GDP, and they've hovered around this for a very long time. The only time they reached 23% was in 2006 or 2007. Since then, they have been very low. And those who know the relationship between the investment ratios and the GDP growth can realize that this limits our growth rates. So that's why the growth rates in Pakistan have been almost dismal, in my opinion. Now you compare yourself to Bangladesh, which was part of this country. Bangladesh, like us, had the same savings ratio of between 15 to 16%, but they have now reached close to 30% of GDP. And what has it done? This has reduced Bangladesh's dependence on foreign savings. They haven't gone to the IMF for last 12, 15 years, I think. And the foreign aid, which Henry Kissinger described this as a basket case, is almost dried up because they don't need it. And the country has been able to attain an investment ratios of 30% and growing at an average rate of 6 to 7% for the last 1 decade. Poverty rates have come down from almost 45% to 22% in just a decade or so. Why I want to present this example is to illustrate the power of domestic savings and reduce dependence on foreign savings. Pakistan's financial depth, financial inclusion, private sector credit to GDP ratios lag behind our neighbors. So the financial savings are something which need to be tapped and mobilized. There is a huge scope for expansion of the financial savings mobilization in Pakistan so that we are able to speed up the rate of investment. If you look at our currency in circulation ratios, they have risen to what I call as an unacceptable level, while our advance to deposit ratios of the banks are actually declining. From the time I was a governor, it was about 80%, and now it is down to 40, 45%. And the SME lending, which had reached about 17%, is down to almost 7%. These are some very worrisome ratios and indicators. In my view, Islamic financing has become quite popular in this country. 70% of those polled would like to switch to Islamic financing. A lot of small savers are not very much comfortable with the banking services. So this is a niche market, in my view. The intersection of greater interest in Islamic financing and small savers, which Modarabas and NBFIs can actually exploit to tap this pool of savings. We are fortunate that we have at present very progressive-minded and forward-looking regulators, SECP and SBP. this is the time for your association to move away from the traditional ways of doing business and bring about innovations as the regulators would assist and facilitate you in this task. The risk, in my view, is that sooner or later the fintechs would create such disruption that both banking and non-banking institutions would lose their primacy. So before they do that, you have to jump in and reposition yourself. Use of technology to mobilize savings and reduce the cost of lending is something you should aim at. Brick and mortar presence that entails a lot of upward expense can be avoided. So my advice is that you should not be complacent with what you've been doing in the past, but try to position yourself for the future. I'm glad that the waterfront covering the NBFIs has expanded vastly. And we have now institutions such as Sharia compliant mutual funds, pension funds, investment finance companies, REITs, provident funds, endowment funds, which have been set up in the last 2 decades. These institutions, all of them can play a critical role in the development of capital debt markets that in Pakistan are yet to take off. SECP has recently encouraged setting up of housing finance companies because we are now looking at a 500 billion rupees investment, which is going to be channeled in construction and housing sectors. These investments will attract and, as I have been saying, are very much suited, compatible with the Islamic mode of financing. And the diminishing musharaka, which is one of the very attractive products, is something which builds up the equity of the borrower while reducing its indebtedness. And that is something which the non-bank financing institutions, particularly the housing companies, have to look at it. Now, you also were complaining about the deployment of liquidity. Well, the government of Pakistan has now adopted a calendar, a regular calendar for issuance of sukuks, both domestically as well as internationally. And this will be now a regular feature of our borrowing strategy. The maturity mismatch inherent in the banking business can be overcome by these long-term investment instruments. NBFIs, insurance companies, REITs, housing finance companies, infrastructure investment funds are always looking for opportunities to deploy their resources profitably. The Sharia compliant housing and infrastructure investments are quite suitable for this purpose. I was glad that the Pakistan Power Sukuk 2, which we issued last year, attracted a lot of interest by NBFIs. And the healthy competition resulted in a significant saving for us, the issuer, the GOP, compared to the traditional ways of issuance. And I'm happy that the SECP is encouraging other issuers to adopt the same method of book building through the debt market. I would encourage all of you, the Modarba's NBFIs, to continue your participation in these issues. And I would also urge the corporates to expand their borrowing instruments by including these kind of sukuks. So these are some thoughts, some ideas, which I hope that your association and the players who are responsible for the Sharia compliant Islamic funding and Islamic financing would take to work on for the future. Thank you once again for inviting me to share my views with this very august audience. Thank you very much.